You know that feeling? It's late. You're staring at a screen, maybe a pile of books, a blank page, and you've poured weeks, maybe even months, of this grueling, quiet effort into something, a project, a goal, or just the stubborn act of trying to get better.
It's that hard work that nobody ever sees, the silent, solitary stuff.
Exactly. And then, when the results finally come in, or this is the painful part, when they frustratingly don't, that's when society steps in.
And what does it judge? It almost always just looks at the finished product, the outcome, the headline.
Right. They celebrate the victory lap, they admire the polished statue, but they completely miss the thousands of solitary, often painful steps you took just to get to the starting line.
Let alone the finish. It's a huge disconnect.
In that friction, that universal sense of your deepest, most honest effort going completely unseen, or worse, invalidated. That's the core of what we're diving into today.
We're unpacking what our sources call the process paradox.
It's this silent structural rule in society that says we publicly honor the result, the trophy, the A+, the job title, whatever.
But at the same time, we diminish or ignore or maybe even fear the brutal character-forming journey that actually created it.
This deep dive is for you, the learner. The person who knows that real growth happens in that messy middle part, not just at the clean, tidy end.
Our mission today is to really dissect this bias. We need to trace its historical and psychological roots, because this isn't just a modern social media thing.
No, this is fundamental. It's like a bug in the human operating system.
And we want to explore the huge existential cost it takes from anyone who's actually committed to growth.
The sources we're looking at are, well, they're profound. A little uncomfortable even. They analyze everything from our primal survival instincts all the way up to the pressure cooker of the modern attention economy.
And they give us this one key image that I think captures the whole discussion perfectly.
Yeah.
The world sees success as this finished, perfectly polished statue, but it completely fails to acknowledge, or maybe even refuses to acknowledge, the thousands and thousands of times that rough stone was chipped away in private.
Painfully, uncertainly, with no guarantee of the outcome.
Exactly. That contrast, the statue versus the chipping process, that's where the real human story is, and that's where we have to start.
Okay, so the most immediate and I think most painful part of this paradox is just how lopsided society's view is.
It's not just that we crave outcomes and celebrate achievements, it's that the culture itself sets up this structure where the achievement is the only metric of value.
And at the same time, it sort of shies away from the messiness, the vulnerability, the pain that's required to get there.
It creates this really vicious dynamic. The struggle itself becomes almost meaningless until a visible outcome comes along to confirm its worth.
And if that result doesn't show up?
Well, then all those hours, all that persistence, all the sacrifices you made, they get retroactively labeled as wasted time.
Or worse.
Or, more cruelly, as evidence that you just weren't good enough.
The sources are so critical of this. They basically say this result-focused view turns your process, your effort, into nothing more than a weak excuse.
Well, the result gets elevated to the level of undeniable proof.
Let's make this concrete, because the sources use these really universal, painful examples that I think everyone can relate to.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with the first place we learn this bias, school, the academic world.
Okay, case one, the dedicated student.
Right. So imagine a student takes on a notoriously difficult class. Maybe it's organic chemistry or advanced physics, something really tough.
And they dedicate 3 solid months. Not just cramming, I mean really engaging, sacrificing their social life, losing sleep. They are wrestling with this material.
But then the results come in and they fail the exam. Maybe just barely, but they fail.
And what does society see? What does the system see?
Just the failing grade. That one number. All those months of intense effort are just erased.
The internal struggle, the character they built by not quitting every single night, it's all dismissed.
Because the failure is concrete. It's visible, it's quantifiable. But the effort, that's murky, it's internal, so it gets discounted.
And that's when the student's own mindset starts to shift.
Right.
They stop valuing the learning.
The actual expansion of their mind.
And they start only valuing the score. And that's the moment the paradox starts to really mess with their sense of self-worth.
Precisely. Now let's take another one. Case number 2. The gym goer. The person focused on their fitness.
Okay.
They commit to 4 months of consistent, grueling workouts. They show up when they're tired, they eat right, they manage their stress better. Fundamentally, they are a stronger, healthier person than they were on day one.
But they don't have the six-pack yet. They don't look like the cover of a magazine.
Exactly. And because they haven't achieved that ideal physique, they are often judged by others, or even worse, they judge themselves.
As not trying hard enough.
Right. The effort is completely discounted because the finished product hasn't shown up on a timeline dictated by social media.
We're judging 4 months of struggle against an ideal that might take 4 years.
It's a structurally unfair comparison. It makes the person feel like those last 120 days were a complete waste because they can't prove their diligence with a visible, quantifiable outcome.
Which brings us to the third example, and this one feels so relevant right now. The creator.
The writer, the artist, the YouTuber.
Yeah, imagine someone who pours their soul into building a skill. They're writing, coding, making videos consistently for 12 straight months. They are demonstrably better at their craft than when they started.
But if the channel hasn't blown up, if the algorithm hasn't picked them, if they haven't seen that rapid viral growth we're all conditioned to expect,
They get dismissed by others, and again, by their own internal critic, as talentless or ineffective.
the continuous daily creative labor, the fight against self-doubt, the technical failures, all of it is judged so ruthlessly against these arbitrary metrics of rapid success.
We see the final video, not the 100 failed edits or the 3 months of silence where they were this close to quitting.
In every one of these cases, it's the same pattern. The outcome becomes the only acceptable proof of value.
And the process is just an afterthought.
But the philosophical core of what the sources are arguing is the absolute opposite. The process is where the real person is actually formed. It forges your character, your perseverance, your spirit. The outcome is just a fleeting moment in time.
We have to talk about the iceberg analogy here. It just makes the concept so clear.
It's perfect for this. The result is just that visible tip of the iceberg. It's what everyone sees above the water. The success, the recognition, the finished thing.
The easy-to-digest story.
Yes, that's the marketable narrative. But the sources challenge us. They challenge you to look beneath the surface.
To that vast, unseen part below the water.
That is where the actual heavy foundation is built. That foundation is made of persistence and loneliness and repeated, grinding failures and all those difficult internal debates. The psychological struggle to keep going when your results are flat.
It's the weight of the invisible. And this is where the source material makes this beautiful connection to classical philosophy, specifically Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius.
When Aurelius talks about maintaining your internal fortitude, he's talking about the moral and spiritual victories you win away from the public eye.
And the sources use this phrase, succinthum thum lanquid noitem.
The silent victory of the inner self.
It's such a powerful idea. It's the battle you fight with your worst self every morning. The decision not to quit when the world gives you zero reason to continue.
That is the victory that defines the quality of your character. And yet, it's structurally completely invisible to the outside world.
So that leads to the big question. Why? Why is the world so quick to judge and so dismissive of this deep, difficult process?
It comes down to what the sources call the speed versus depth dilemma.
It's about cognitive load, isn't it? It's just easier.
It's so much easier. Society reaches conclusions based on results because it's faster and requires way less energy than taking the time to understand a long, meandering, complex process.
In our modern era, speed and ease always win over patience and depth. People just don't have the emotional or cognitive bandwidth to look into your 3-year journey.
They only have the bandwidth to see who finished first and slap a simple label on it.
So it's a collective coping mechanism. If the real story is too complex, we just replace it with a shorter, easier, and often dangerously incomplete one.
They got lucky. They're just talented. They cheated.
And the tragedy is when we start to internalize that. We start applying that same shallow judgment to our own deep efforts if they don't produce results fast enough.
Which is a recipe for quitting and for, internal devastation.
It's jarring to realize how much of this is wired into us. So let's go deeper. Where did this systemic obsession really begin? What are the deep roots?
To really get why this paradox is so persistent, we have to look past the superficial stuff, past social media, even past our current economy.
We have to look at the deep structural reasons why humans default to measuring outcomes.
The sources break it down into 8 fundamental gaps or roots that feed this obsession, and they go way back.
Let's start with the most ancient one, the one that's still wired into our lizard brain. Primal instinct.
Right. Why does the caveman brain still influence how we judge a software project or students' grades?
Because survival was all about immediate assessment.
Exactly. Early humans couldn't afford to observe a nuanced character arc. Their judgments were about results. Did the hunter bring back food? Who's strong enough to protect the tribe? Who's draining resources?
It was immediate, practical, and literally life or death.
They needed quick, clear signals to determine value for the group's survival. And thousands of years later, that high-speed instinct is still there.
Our brain still prefers the clear, quick signal, the result, over the murky, confusing process that takes energy to understand.
So if we don't consciously fight that wiring, we'll always take the low-effort route of just judging the outcome.
Okay, that makes sense for survival.
Right.
But then civilization formalizes it. The second route, our educational structure.
From the moment we walk into a school, we are taught, maybe not explicitly, that scores and grades matter more than the effort or the growth you gain through the messy process of actually learning something.
Value becomes quantified. It's on a report card, a transcript. We turn human development into a spreadsheet.
And the child who studies like crazy, who really struggles with a concept but gets a C, they're often overlooked.
While the gifted kid who just breezes through gets all the praise.
The system effectively tells us from age 5, your internal experience is not the metric, the external number is. That's so damaging because it sets up this false expectation that effort should always equal the score.
Which is almost never true in the real world.
Almost never. So after school, we enter the world of constant comparison. The third route, the culture of comparison.
We're always looking side to side to see where we stand.
It's part of our social programming. But here's the key. Comparison has to rely on things you can measure.
And results are easy to measure. Bank accounts, followers, job titles, body weight. They're all just numbers.
But you can't compare the sleepless nights. You can't quantify the self-doubt or the resilience or the quiet fight against quitting.
Since the process is invisible and hard to quantify, it just gets left out of the equation.
Which creates a shallow society that ignores deep internal growth in favor of convenient surface-level metrics. We end up comparing our messy chapter 1 to everyone else's polished chapter 10.
And that comparison culture is just put on steroids by the fourth route, the modern one, digital age distortion.
Oh yeah. The sources really dig into this. We are just flooded with curated highlights, these overnight success stories on Instagram and TikTok. All we see is the final polished achievement. We see the light.
But we don't see the shadow.
We don't see the silent failures, the months of zero results, the crippling self-doubt, the financial loss, the burnout.
And when all you see is the light, you start to believe a dangerously incomplete truth.
That success is instant or viral or just based on raw talent. It completely hides the reality that sustained, boring, incremental work is the actual engine of all real growth.
And it makes you feel uniquely inadequate if your slow, honest progress isn't immediately Instagrammable.
It sets an impossible standard, which connects directly to the fifth root, our societal aversion to imperfection.
We're obsessed with the finished product. We want clean, neat, perfect outputs.
We buy the finished painting, not the 1,000 discarded sketches.
But the process is, by its very nature, messy.
It's full of self-doubt, low points, mistakes, frustration. The process is not beautiful, it's not Instagrammable, so society shoves it backstage.
And when we internalize that, we become ashamed of our own process. We start hiding our mistakes or small steps.
And by hiding the process, we hide the most authentic human part of ourselves. The irony is the more we hide it, the more talented we look, but the more isolated we become.
That need for a clean story brings us to route number 6. Simple psychological simplification.
The human brain is an energy efficiency machine. It prefers the short story.
It's cognitively cheaper.
Way cheaper. When someone succeeds, a startup sells for $1 billion, an athlete wins gold, the brain defaults to the simplest narrative. They're a genius. They got lucky.
Which requires almost zero mental effort. It's much easier than telling the real story. 4 years of grueling work, 17 failed prototypes, constant self-revision.
We choose the easy explanation because it saves energy, and if we don't acknowledge their effort, well, we don't have to put in that effort ourselves.
Which leads to the 7th route, and this one feels like the really deep, painful one.
I think it's the most critical, the fear of one's own process.
The idea that we honor the result in others because we're afraid to look at our own messy, unfinished journey.
It's a powerful defense mechanism. If I truly acknowledge the immense hidden effort that went into your success,
then I'm forced to confront my own inaction, my own procrastination.
It creates an internal pressure I might not want to face. So by focusing on your talent or your luck, I can safely dismiss your journey and avoid that difficult self-reflection about my own lack of action.
So honoring the result becomes a way to maintain the comforting belief that success is about some magical quality, not about years of grinding work that I'm not doing.
That is what solidifies the striving person's feeling of being completely vohid invisible.
It's a system built on avoiding personal responsibility. And that brings us to the final root, the attention economy.
Our whole modern ecosystem, media, ads, algorithms, is built to capture fleeting attention.
And results generate strong, immediate attention. A headline, a viral clip, a big number.
Process, on the other hand, generates weak, slow, subtle attention. It requires patience.
So in the battle for engagement, results always win, no matter how important the process actually is for human development.
These 8 roots, from primal to digital, show that this isn't just a modern flaw. It's a deep-seated structural issue that we have to learn to navigate.
That's overwhelming. To see all those forces lined up against the process.
Yeah.
But wait, before we go on, I have to ask, aren't the sources just dismissing results entirely? Don't we need results for accountability to know if something even worked?
That is a crucial point. And no, the sources are much more nuanced than that. They are absolutely not dismissing results. It's not about celebrating failure just because someone tried hard.
So what's the distinction they're making?
The result should be seen as an evaluative consequence of the process, not the sole determinant of human worth.
Okay, break that down.
A result tells you if your method was effective, if the market valued your output. It's critical feedback. But where we go wrong is we allow that one single data point to define the value of the person who went through the process.
We confuse the assessment of the method with the assessment of the self.
That's the fundamental inversion, and it's that confusion that does all the damage.
That makes so much more sense. Okay, so let's look at how these roots create the daily mechanisms that keep this paradox alive and the profound damage they inflict on us. So we've laid out the deep roots of the problem. Now, how does this actually play out day to day? What are the systemic mechanisms that keep reinforcing this unhealthy focus on just the outcome?
The first one is the most foundational. It's simply the reward mechanism. Society is structured to only reward the outcome.
Praise, opportunity, money. It's all tied almost exclusively to visible, quantifiable results.
Exactly. Nobody gets a bonus for 300 days of quiet, persistent effort that didn't hit the sales target.
Right. You don't get a graduation party for a sustained, diligent effort that resulted in a C-.
And that's the feedback loop that trains your brain. It teaches you that the process, the effort, is fundamentally worthless if it doesn't lead to a rewardable form.
And since we're wired to seek rewards, we naturally start chasing what's rewarded.
The visible result. And we minimize the value of what's unseen, the effort. It creates this incentive to find shortcuts or just pursue easy-to-quantify goals, regardless of the deeper meaning.
This is so intertwined with our modern life, which is the second mechanism. Social media and the skewed reality of the highlight reel.
As we touched on, social media is built to display the final episode. It broadcasts the win, the perfect photo, the clean story.
But it hides all the days of zero engagement, the setbacks, the financial stress, the self-doubt.
And what that does, crucially, is it radically distorts our understanding of how long development actually takes.
It leads directly to this belief that real success is supposed to be instantaneous or just talent-based.
Rather than the product of years of sustained, boring, incremental process.
So if your journey feels hard, if you're on month 6 and still struggling, you assume you're uniquely failing.
Because everyone else's journey looks so smooth and easy, it's just a reel of highlights. This creates immense pressure and contributes to the massive burnout rate we see among new creators or entrepreneurs.
They quit because their slow, real process doesn't match the fast, fake narrative they're consuming every day.
And this feeds right back into that collective fear of imperfection. The sources say our cultural preference for perfection acts as a psychological mechanism to keep this whole system in place.
The fear of seeing failure in other people is really about a fear of confronting our own messiness, our own potential for weakness.
So by hyper-focusing on the perfect, finished result, we all collectively avoid that existential pressure, that question of, if I start something hard, how many times will I fail? Am I willing to show those failures?
And when success is the only thing that validates the whole process, people adopt what the sources call the proving mindset.
They start chasing quick, shallow outcomes that are easy to quantify or easy to post online, instead of pursuing deep, meaningful growth that takes time.
They're optimizing their lives for external validation.
They live to prove themselves to an external, judging audience, rather than to genuinely develop themselves internally.
It's a total inversion of purpose. It turns self-improvement into a performance.
And if you're only focused on proving, you'll always take the easiest path to the external metric, even if it means sacrificing real competence.
This leads to the final mechanism they point out, the invisible trade-offs.
Every big process requires huge sacrifice. Your time, your energy, your health, your relationships.
But since society only sees the shiny result, it completely misses the true cost involved.
And because that cost, the sacrifice, is invisible, the achievement is easily dismissed by people watching. They call it easy, or luck, or talent.
They don't see what the person gave up, so they assume the journey was effortless, which just further diminishes the value of the effort itself.
So all these mechanisms work together to create a world where results are in the spotlight and the hard process gets shoved into the shadows.
Leaving the individual to struggle in a place where their greatest efforts are never recognized and their sacrifices are never acknowledged. When this happens over and over, the damage moves past just career frustration and becomes genuinely existential, spiritual even.
The first major casualty is this profound sense of alienation and loss of agency.
You start to feel like an actor in a play that society wrote for you.
Right, you're just focused on delivering the final approved act, the promotion, the winning score. You lose the sense that you are the genuine author of your own life, of your own process.
And that leads to this huge existential anxiety. Because the value of your deepest, quietest struggles, that silent victory of the inner self we talked about, it's not being acknowledged externally.
So the version of you that is succeeding on the outside feels fake. It doesn't feel like your true self. And that creates a fundamental split.
Which is what the sources call inner fragmentation.
You end up developing two different versions of yourself. The struggling, real version that's constantly failing and doubting and learning.
And the successful, polished, result-focused version that society demands and applauds.
And those two versions are completely misaligned. This separation leads to this profound internal fatigue. It costs a massive amount of energy to maintain.
You feel like you're always playing a role for the outside world.
And the better you get at playing that successful role, the more invisible your real, struggling, vulnerable self becomes, which leads to this deep sense of spiritual emptiness.
That emptiness then feeds directly into the doubts of meaning. This is like a classic Kierkegaardian crisis.
If the effort itself doesn't bring any recognition, or if the result is delayed forever, you start to question the whole point of it.
Is what I'm doing actually meaningful? Or am I just wasting my life on something that might never be seen or valued?
When external validation is the only reliable measure of worth, and that validation isn't coming, your whole foundation of purpose starts to crumble. The goal isn't just to achieve, it's to be seen achieving. And the lack of that witness is devastating.
Which often results in the shame of the process.
Since the process is undervalued and messy, we learn really early to just hide our mistakes, hide our small steps, our vulnerabilities, our doubts. We sanitize our own reality.
And in hiding our process, we lose the most authentic, relatable, human part of ourselves. We stop sharing the real struggle.
Which leads directly to the final and I think the most painful impact. The loneliness of the striver.
The person striving diligently in silence, focused on a long-term goal that hasn't materialized yet. That might be the loneliest person in modern society.
They feel like they're climbing a mountain completely alone, while everyone else seems to be taking this publicized elevator straight to the top.
And they're showing off their ascent in real time.
Meanwhile, their immense patient effort feels perpetually vohin invisible.
And the sources are really clear on this. That feeling of invisibility, that sense that your struggle just doesn't count, is the single biggest psychological factor that makes people quit.
Right on the verge of success. They don't quit because the work is hard. They quit because the work feels meaningless when it's unwitnessed.
We see this toll everywhere. In young people with paralyzing anxiety from comparison, in artists who trash years of work because it didn't go viral.
In the workplace where quiet diligence is penalized while quick, showy wins are rewarded.
The internalization of this paradox turns the necessary act of striving into an act of debilitating self-criticism.
It's a tragic systemic irony. Society's demand for immediate, clean results actually causes people to abandon the very process that was about to create those results. The system is eating its own future.
So, if the structural forces are this powerful, how do we possibly escape this trap? How do we reclaim the integrity of our own journey?
Okay, so this final part is the crucial pivot. We're moving from diagnosis to actual, actionable strategy.
And the challenge is huge, because we can't just rewrite the rules of modern society overnight.
Exactly. We have to learn how to maintain our own integrity and focus despite these structural pressures.
The first step, it seems, is just acceptance and clarity, acknowledging the structural conflict.
Right. We have to accept the reality that we can't change the world's pace. The attention economy, the speed of information, the obsession with numbers.
The sources say that just railing against the system only makes us feel weaker and more powerless.
But seeing it clearly, analyzing it dispassionately, that makes us stronger because we stop being surprised or emotionally wounded when the world doesn't validate our effort. We start to expect the invisibility.
And this is where Stoicism provides this ancient, necessary framework for how to navigate this. The Stoic distinction.
We have to get crystal clear on distinguishing between what we control and what we do not control.
We control our inner rhythm, our efforts, our consistency, the quality of our character.
We do not control external praise, society's recognition, the timing of the outcome, or how other people see our process. If your self-worth depends on things outside your control, you will always be fragile.
So our focus has to be surgically on what is internal and within our power.
And in this context, the sources bring back that incredible quote from Seneca that has to become a guiding principle for anyone trying to escape this paradox. Not everything that is counted matters, and not everything that matters is counted.
The societal metrics, the things that are easy to count like dollars or followers or speed, they aren't necessarily the things that define a meaningful life or a resilient character.
We have to make a conscious choice to value the profound internal metrics, the things that matter, even if they can't be counted or seen by the world.
And realizing this means we have to address transparency. We have to consciously train ourselves to see that we are almost always only seeing the edited version of other people's lives.
The world is a stage. Everyone is performing the final, glossy scene, and they're hiding the complicated rehearsals and the discarded scripts. We have to stop letting that curated external view dictate our internal reality.
If we keep comparing our messy process to someone else's polished result, we are living in a comparison trap that is structurally guaranteed to make us miserable.
When you stop being fooled by the highlight reel, you gain this critical emotional distance that you need for self-preservation and for respecting your own pace.
Okay, so if we accept the structure, but we refuse to be defined by its metrics, what are the practical daily steps? How do we reclaim and validate our own journey?
The first one is essential: cultivating internal sight. We have to actively learn to see our own process.
This requires a conscious effort to just slow down internally.
And to deliberately recognize the small, quiet changes. The day you didn't give up when you felt worthless. The small but real improvement in a skill. The slight increase in your own resilience.
If we don't actively witness our own progress, we will inevitably feel like we're just standing still.
And if we feel like we're standing still, we become dangerously vulnerable to the external judgment that says we're worthless or untalented. We have to become our own best observer.
This leads to the second, and this is maybe the hardest strategy, accepting the lack of witness.
The painful truth is that most people, your colleagues, the public, sometimes even your family, will never see the struggle. They won't see the self-doubt or the quiet dedication.
And our job, the sources argue, is not to change their view. It's to make sure their lack of a view doesn't become our self-view.
Their ignorance of our struggle cannot be allowed to translate into our internal judgment of worthlessness.
And that acceptance leads to the practice of self-sufficiency.
We have to build a system of internal validation that is so robust that we no longer require external applause. This is a profound philosophical shift. It leads to what Epictetus called "Sotechikulinhun," the autonomy of the soul.
That autonomy really is the promised land here.
It is. When you no longer need a witness, you gain the freedom to move slowly without shame, to fail spectacularly without collapsing, and to restart without feeling small or judged.
Your own intrinsic motivation, your own hands applauding your own effort becomes the only reward you need.
We also have to consciously choose the long rhythm. Society loves speed and instant gratification, but true, deep, sustainable growth comes from persistence over intensity.
It's about doing something consistently for a year, not intensely for 1 week.
This choice requires radical patience. It means accepting ambiguity and slow, unheralded progress. It means accepting that there will be weeks, maybe months, where the only thing you accomplish is that you just kept going.
That stubborn refusal to quit is the real hallmark of strength, even if it goes completely unrecognized.
And finally, We have to find meaning in the why. If we live purely for the result, our sense of meaning is always deferred to some unknowable future. It leaves us anxious in the present.
But meaning is found when we know why we are taking the steps, regardless of where we end up.
Focus on the internal meaning of the effort itself, the integrity of the work, the learning you're gaining, the commitment to becoming a better human.
The sources conclude that the ultimate victory isn't the glittering success or the public acclaim, it's internal freedom.
Freedom from the need for external validation, freedom from comparison, freedom from the pressure of speed, and freedom from that debilitating fear of being unseen.
The true measure of a successful life, completely outside the confines of this paradox, is just becoming a deeper, more resilient version of yourself.
And that journey, even if it's invisible to the world, is the only one that truly matters to the self.
So we've taken a pretty significant deep dive into the core of this process paradox. We've exposed how society structurally and psychologically elevates the quantifiable result,
while diminishing the grueling, essential journey of effort that gets you there. We've traced the deep roots from our primal instincts all the way to digital distortion that keep this bias alive.
And we've detailed the profound existential toll this takes on people, the fragmentation of the self, the loss of meaning, and that deep, agonizing loneliness of the striver who feels vohin, invisible.
The sources are definitive on this. The most dangerous outcome of this paradox isn't just failing. It's that soul-crushing feeling of invisibility that causes people to abandon the process right before they ever have a chance to see the results.
So remember this. Your intrinsic value is not defined by external metrics. It is certainly not defined by whether your process generates a trending post or a clean number on a spreadsheet. Your worth is in your choice to continue the difficult process, to keep chipping away at that stone, even when no one is watching.
So we want to leave you with the two fundamental existential questions that the source material poses, and they really challenge the very structure of how we value human endeavor.
First, if the process is what truly creates the character, the integrity, and the resilience of the human we become, why do we continue to live as though the effort and the struggle of that journey don't matter?
And second, if the result is only the final fleeting moment of a long and difficult journey, why do we allow that single moment to define or brutally dismiss the entire life we live to reach it?
Become your own most reliable witness. Recognize your own hidden processes, and never let the world's need for speed dictate your own profound need for depth.